A Ponzi scheme is a sleazebag way to generate moolah by defrauding your later investors. The fraudsters do not invest your money. Instead, they will pay earlier investors and leave you broke and living in a box.
Squidward, is that you?
So you should probably avoid investing in Ponzi schemes if you can help it. Usually you can spot a Ponzi scheme if you see one of these things: high returns with little to no risk, secretive strategies for making money. Previous investors are saying that they haven't received any payments. Or maybe you find yourself wanting to buy a picture of a monkey online that is supposedly worth millions, but it actually has no inherent value. And with that being said, I'm gonna rank my favorite Ponzi schemes of all time. Some of these schemes are actually pretty crazy, so stay tuned. Ah yes, the man who the scheme is named after. The goat of Ponzi schemes, perhaps. Charles Ponzi. So this guy lived in Boston around the 1920s, and his initial idea was to buy cheap international reply coupons from Europe and exchange them across the seas for stamps of higher value in the United States. These stamps cost more than his international reply coupons, so you could say this is an arbitrage. He essentially would pocket the difference between these IRCs and stamps, and that's how he would make his money. Charles Ponzi was broke at the time of discovering this idea, so he recruited his friends in hopes of getting investments to do this, and it worked. He said he could double their initial investment in 90 days. So after that, Ponzi got some of his friends to recruit his other friends, and they made money from this. You can kind of see where this is going now. So Ponzi started cheating a little bit, and he just paid off the first investors with the most recent investors' money. Now this is exactly what a Ponzi scheme is. So eventually Ponzi got investigated and absolutely fraud checked. This led to everyone trying to pull out their money. Spoiler alert, people did not get their money. Ponzi had spent it all on lavish things. Boom, his scheme is done for, and he's in jail for fraud. So supposedly this scheme was generating some pretty good cash for Ponzi. He was making about $3 million in today's money per day. I'm gonna give this an A. I think there was actual potential behind this arbitrage, and he didn't actually have to cheat to make his money. Although eventually maybe they would have ran out of IRCs to give him. In the end, Ponzi probably just got a little bit lazy and greedy, and that's why he was jailed. Next. So long story short, Bernie Madoff was one of the biggest financial fraudsters in history, and he ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history. So Madoff owned a brokerage firm, and he came up with this god-tier trading strategy called the split strike conversion. Now, this trading strategy was not actually good. It was a heaping pile of garbage, but a little fabrication in your trading account balance definitely goes a long way. Madoff cultivated an image of exclusivity. What I mean by that is he charged people $1 million minimum to trade with his firm. So eventually the 2008 housing crisis happened, and what do you know? People want to pull out of his trading firm. You know how this story goes.
There's no money in here!
So I believe he told his children that he was a fraud, and they alerted the authorities. Sorry, Dad, you're cooked. I mean, this is an obvious S-tier scheme. He targeted very wealthy investors, which was, honestly purely genius. Scamming the rich is always better than scamming the poor, because you'll get more money. Well, now Madoff only needs to spend 150 years in jail, and then he can enjoy his hard work and relax. So this guy named Gerald Payne founded Greater-Ministries International. This was a religious investment organization that promised investors insane returns on gold and other precious metals. This guy told his church that these returns were possible because God was blessing their investments. I could be wrong, but I think that's a sin. So this organization eventually attracted tens of thousands of investors, many of which were devout Christians. So of course these promised returns never actually materialized, and the organization was revealed to be a massive Ponzi scheme. New investors' money was paid off to earlier investors, and no actual investments were taking place. In 2001, Payne and several associates of his were convicted of fraud and sentenced to some jail time. So I'm gonna be honest, believing your investments are backed by God and not subject to human intervention is definitely an interesting belief, but scamming old religious people for their faith is really screwed up. It might be worse than calling up your grandma and posing as a tech scammer. I'm gonna put this in C tier. Not cool, dude. Reed Slatkin was the co-founder of an internet service provider called Earthlink. Now, while that was a legit company, he actually ran a Ponzi scheme on the side called the Reed Slatkin Investment Club. You honestly can't make that shit up. He primarily targeted wealthy individuals, kind of like Bernie Madoff, but it was more up in Hollywood. So Slatkin falsely claimed that he was investing his clients' money in profitable ventures, and he often used his Earthlink connections to build up his trust and credibility. So his scheme began to unravel in the 1990s, particularly close to the dot-com bubble, and people wanted to pull out their money. He couldn't meet these withdrawal requirements that were coming in, and eventually his fraudulent activities came into light. In 2003, he was convicted of being a fraud. So I'll place this in C tier. I think there's nothing very special about this. Certainly using his Earthlink connections as ways to gain trust and credibility were interesting, but it wasn't as good as Madoff's play, that's for sure. Now this is an interesting one. Ron Rewald operated a company called Bishop, Baldwin, Rewald, Dillingham, and Wong. I know, that's a mouthful. This company was staged as a successful investment firm. In reality, he was doing the classic Ponzi scheme, paying older investors with the newer investors' money. And he gave himself a nice Sam Bankman-Fried size cut so he could afford the nicer things in life. This guy lived in Hawaii, so, I don't blame him, honestly. So the truth was Rewald's firm was a complete sham, and it was actually not running any investments at all. He was using his rich image to collect investor money and using that to propel his rich image. The scheme collapsed in 1984 when investors demanded their money back, and guess what? He couldn't pay them. Now this is the interesting part. During the trial, he said he'd been undercover for the CIA for 5 years running this firm. This ended up actually being true. This whole firm was a stage for CIA missions. So Rewald was eventually convicted of fraud and he was sentenced to 80 years in prison, although he got out on parole 10 years later. So I'm gonna put this scheme in A because I think it's just really interesting that the CIA might have been involved in this firm somehow. The dude was actually a CIA agent, and I'm guessing there's a lot we don't know about this story. Anyways. Stephen Hoffenberg founded Towers Financial Corporation, which was a debt collection agency that was supposed to buy debts from hospitals, phone companies, and etc. He used this company to perpetrate a massive Ponzi scheme, raising hundreds of millions of dollars and giving the impression of financial health. He also bought a nice-sized mansion for himself, as well as a couple cars and planes along the way. Hoffenberg's scheme came to light in the early 1990s when the company's financial difficulties became apparent. Some regulators started investigating Towers Financial, and the whole thing got brought down pretty quickly. Hoffenberg eventually pleaded guilty to fraud in 1995. Now, he had an associate, and his name was Epri. This guy, according to court documents, was involved in Towers Financial, but he pulled out just in time before the company was accused of fraud. Dean was never charged in this case. I'm gonna put this in C. I think being friends with pretty bad to begin with. And this scheme was basically just a classic Ponzi scheme with nothing new or very interesting, besides his associate. All right, that's gonna do it. Have a good one, everybody. Please subscribe.